Welcome to the Cynical Developer Live. This is the podcast that helps you improve your development knowledge and career through explaining the latest and greatest in development technology, providing you with what you need to succeed as a developer. In this episode, we're joined by Juval Löwy to discuss a question: do developers need architects? Juval is based in California. He's the founder of iDesign and a master software architect specializing in system and project design. He has helped countless companies around the world deliver quality software on schedule and on budget. He has mentored hundreds of architects around the globe, sharing his insights, techniques, and breakthroughs in architecture, project design, development process, and technology. He participated in the Microsoft internal strategic design reviews for C#, WCF, and related technologies, and is recognized by Microsoft as a software legend, being one of the world's top experts and industry leaders. Juval is a frequent speaker at international software development conferences. Juval has published several bestsellers, and his next book is Writing Software. Juval conducts masterclasses around the world, teaching thousands of professionals the skills required of modern software architects and how to take an active role on design, process, and technology. So welcome to the Cynical Developer.
Pleasure to be here, James.
Yeah, it's great that you've been able to take some time out to come and talk to us, because from that introduction, you seem like a very, very busy person.
Yeah, you actually caught me in Stockholm, and tomorrow I'm moving to Norway.
Nice, nice. Yeah, I've done a little bit of traveling over the last few weeks, and through the world of podcasting. It was a few months ago now, probably, and I'm absolutely wiped out. How people like yourselves do it constantly, I don't know, because I never get a good night's sleep in a hotel.
I haven't slept for a week.
Insomnia helps.
Insomnia helps, yes, the jet lag.
Awesome. And I was only, jet lag shouldn't have been a thing for me, because I went to Krakow, Amsterdam, and then Budapest. So it was only a few hours here and there. So I was all right for jet lag. That didn't happen.
Yeah, I clock 200,000 miles annually.
Nice. I think that's nearly as much as I do commuting.
Same time at least.
Yeah. It feels like it. So we're here today not to compare how far we travel around the world, but to answer the question, or at least discuss the question: do developers really need architects? Now, the podcast is aimed at different people at different walks of life, different positions in their careers, becoming developers. So for some of them out there, they're not going to know what an architect is, at least maybe not a software architect. Could you give us a brief overview, an introduction to what an architect is?
So it's one of those things that people have different opinions, and it's hard to get from people a clear definition. I'll give you my definition. To me, the architect is a person that wears three roles, that wears three hats, and therefore is performing three roles. The architect owns the technical, the design, and the process aspects of the project. Meaning, most developers add the most value when they understand the domain, the requirements, they build with it just for that customer over there, how this requirement is different from that requirement. And that's what the business actually wants. The business really wants people that understand their domain and their business, because, things like technology, these things are transient, they come and go. On the other hand, somebody really needs to understand what the technology has to offer, and technology keeps changing all the time. And, you got to pick your battles. And so most developers don't have the time both to be really good in technology and really good in domain. So most architects also take a very active leadership role on the technology. And it doesn't matter if it's in helping developers on decision on what to do, not necessarily on the how. The how, there's enough information in Google and books and such. But on the what, that's where leadership comes in. And another aspect of technical leadership is in preparing the organization for what's coming, because there's always what's coming. There's always the next platform, the next shift, whatever it is. So that's just on the technology side. Architects also have to take a very active leadership role on the process. And by process, I mean the development process, the layout of the project, How do you make sure the organization is making the right decisions? Could the organization even afford doing the project in the first place? If so, how do you set the project so that management is going to have a clear picture of where the project is heading, raising flags before problems materialize, and so on? There's a whole world of what it means as far as process. It has to do also with how do you separate the two, how do you actually separate and combine the worlds of business and software, because the business world is very different from the software world. The software always exists to service the business, but it's literally two separate universes. And so from a process perspective, there's all the aspect of how do you go from requirements to design to code. I mean, it's obviously very iterative and so on. And finally, on the design side, which is what the word architect may imply, is owning the architecture. And architecture is this big picture view of what blocks are going to be in the system, the breakdown, the decomposition into the building blocks. And it's also the more finer aspect of the design, which may or may not be done by the developer. It's also dependent on what kind of a team you have and the background of developers, which is the shape and the structure of the individual building blocks, the services, classes, interfaces, message formats, parameters, and so on. And it's a spectrum to what degree the architect is involved in that, but for sure the architect owns the architecture. So you have this somebody that literally is wearing three hats, because that somebody is owning the technology, the process, and the design. And if you try and abstract that, you actually get somebody who is what I'm calling the technical manager. The architect is the de facto technical manager of the project. And the word manager is misleading, because for most people, a manager is a pointy hair, Dilbert style, paper pushing, empty suit manager. But so the word manager is misleading. But if you own the technologies, design, and the process, you are managing the technical aspects of the project. You don't manage the people, you manage the technical aspects. So that's literally, in a nutshell, my definition of an architect.
Sure. So for for me, I think some of the things that you pointed out there, which was good understanding of the domain model, good understanding of the business that they're working in, good understanding of what is needed from a technical point of view. Is that not something that really a senior developer should be doing rather than a specific role?
No, senior developer, as the name implies, needs to develop code. And again, look at it purely from a value perspective. Developers add the most value when they understand the domain, when they understand the business. The difference between a senior developer and junior developer is not in years of experience. It's in their ability to understand the domain and the business on one side, and in their ability to provide the details, meaning the mapping between the understanding of the domain to the shape of things to come, meaning the services and the contract and the messages and the interfaces and such. This is as far as developers need to go. Developers typically do not step beyond that and look at the entire system and the layout of the system. That has almost nothing to do with developing code. To use a building analogy, the equivalent of the software architect in the civil engineering world is not the person called the architect, actually. It's rather the engineering company that does the calculation of all the stress on the beams and the spacing between the doors and all of those things that have to do with compliance, with code, with structure, and so on. And the developers in this analogy are simply the contractors, the plumbers, the electricians, the carpenters, and so on. Now, obviously, it really helps if the contractor or the carpenter understands and they know how to read blueprints and they know where to put the walls and such, but they don't bother themselves with the design of the building or the structure of the beams. They just make it so.
Sure. So I think where that stems from then is maybe working for some smaller companies that don't have that specific role of an architect, and they leave it down to the senior developers to be the people to actually be doing that role as well.
Well, and that unfortunately has predictable results. The reality is that doing what I just said is a specialty on its own. It requires a unique set of skills. Literally, like anything else in life, it takes 10,000 hours to be really good at. And even if you're building a single family home, a small house, would you like to do it without blueprints? Just ship some beams and some bricks and have the construction workers figure out how to build it? In theory, you can even build a house this way, but it will be probably the worst way of building the house. You're going to figure out all the design as you're building up the house. You're going to be wasting enormous amount of energy and building material and time. And so this is actually the way, if you think about it, that all the other engineering were done before the modern age. Before the modern age, we didn't have modern civil engineers, we didn't have modern mechanical engineers, we didn't have modern electrical engineers. And in an almost haphazard way, people tried to do things and then they fail and they collapsed. And over centuries, the knowledge of how to do it has emerged, and then it was actually preserved in forms of guilds and so on. And so it was a very long process for all the other engineers to get to where we are actually today. And in that respect, software development is done like mechanical engineering was in the 18th century or civil engineering in the 10th century. Right? It's before modernization. It's before the recognition of the knowledge, the patterns, the consistencies, the standards, all the things that makes modern engineering what it is.
Yeah, and I think that that analogy back to building a house, I think that's the approach that the people took that built my garage. I think the way the walls are all wobbly, the ceiling's not level. Maybe it was a jack of all trades trying to do it rather than specialists.
And to make it even worse, there's lots of cognitive biases here, meaning by definition, people don't know what they don't know, right?
Yeah.
And then there's a cognitive bias called Dunning-Kruger, which basically means that people never recognize their own incompetence. If you're not skilled at something, you think it's actually simple, it's not complex, it's no big deal, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so those who don't understand the long-term impact of their design decisions, who won't even have to be the ones maintaining it over the next 10 years and such, never have to live with the consequences of their poor design decision. And since they don't know how to even do design, you get the perspective that we don't need those thinking architects. Look, it works. It compiles. It works, right? And there's a big difference between making something work and getting by versus doing things well. To use here an analogy, if you look at life in the 10th century, I always imagine the scene from Monty Python where, they're riding there and there's these two peasants in the mud, right? And oh, look at the mud. The mud is amazing. Remember that scene? And people in the 10th century had ugly, brutal, filthy, short lives, right? I mean, it wasn't great fun. But you know what? They still laughed and they loved and they raised families, okay? And some of them had a pretty good life, they were the lords and the kings, and they thought they were at the top of the world, right?
Yep.
Well, you know what? You probably don't want to be a lord in the 10th century. You certainly don't want to be a peasant, but you don't even want to be a lord in the 10th century.
Yeah.
And so the fact that you can get by so miserably, which is what software development is doing today, is not an indication it's a good idea.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I think you said it there was the Dunning-Kruger sort of philosophy there. I was having a discussion completely unrelated to software development, and I raised that with somebody, and it was about we're having a conversation around fish keeping and how the people that I was talking to, we admin a large group, one of the biggest groups for fish keeping in the UK, and the amount of flack that we get from new keepers when we ask certain questions, and it's all down to that point that you mentioned there, that they don't know what they don't know, and they think that they know everything because they know a little bit. They don't realize that the topic is so much bigger, and sort of like trying to teach the newer admins and that about this, and sort of say, you got to handle them with a bit of kid gloves and hold their hands and show them the way. Don't be so harsh, and don't take their negative comments to heart.
Well, in general, the best way of shattering something like the cognitive biases and Dunning-Kruger is in small dosage. You don't come barging in and call everybody ignorance and you don't know anything, right?
Yeah.
But when you're raising fish, there's a fundamental difference between that and software. First, raising fish is a physical activity. You can see the fish, you can relate to it. Software is as close as it gets to pure thought, right? So in the absence of a Vulcan mind meld, already communication is a problem. The next problem is you can clearly see some successful fish farmers, right? The fish are not dying, the pH is not going, there's no algae in the pond. There's all the things that go with good fish ponding, right?
Mm-hmm.
People, on the other hand, have spent their entire career in the pits of despair of software development, never seen software done right even once. And when I say to people that every software project I was involved in over the last 30 years, I shipped on schedule, on budget, with zero defects, they think I'm making it up. When I tell them that I've put system in productions, that their design have not changed for at least 20 years, they say I'm making it up. It can't be, right? So the problem you face trying to do things better is that the people that have never seen it's one thing if you don't know how to do it right, but Bob over there is clearly knowing how to do it, so it obviously can be done, right? I mean, it can be done because Bob is doing it. They've never seen anybody else doing it right. So by now they've convinced themselves that it cannot be done. So if you're trying to do something right, like let's have a design that's good for decades in software, right, where you can't do anything until next Thursday before your ever shifting piles of construction debris is going to swallow itself. And if they've ever concluded that it can't be done and you try and do anything good about it, you're basically insulting their intelligence. Because you can't be right and they can't be right? I mean, one of you has to be wrong. And this is why I find people fighting those who are trying to actually do a good job, because they cannot bear the consequence, because the consequence, they've wasted their careers, they've wasted their life. And that's a horrible thing. That's a horrible thing to reckon with, right? And so that's above and beyond the problems of software development, which are acute to begin with, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. So if we've got, say, you're a senior developer and you want to make that jump into architecture, do you need to be a battle-worn, highly experienced developer, or would you say that it's because you mentioned it's very different from being a developer? Is it that specialized that you would say that you need different training, that as a senior developer you wouldn't make a good architect?
you can't make that generalization, because certainly many developers make the transition, and many architects. In fact, I say in my master classes that the architect must be the best developer in a team, except you shouldn't really own any coding responsibilities. The difference is not necessarily in the knowing the code or not, even though, of course, that always happens to discuss why the architect needs to be the best developer in a team. But making the transition from a developer to an architect is a strategic decision. It's not a tactical decision. Meaning, tactical decision is where you work and do you do JavaScript or Python. No, these are tactical decisions. Being an architect is pursuing a completely different career path. It requires you to completely up your game on people skill. It requires you to understand business, not necessarily the domain, but business, what makes your business tick. Because if you don't understand the business, you can't design systems. It requires you to constantly improve yourself. And by far, the most important thing is it requires you to think for yourself. It requires you to have critical thinking, to have integrity, to have the courage of your conviction. And these are things that literally requires a personality metamorphosis. And one of the things that I show in my masterclass is indeed how to go about and practice these things. The easy thing is to read a book on software architecture. That's the easy part, right? Designing yourself and changing yourself, well, that takes time and effort, right? And typically people don't pursue the role of the architect for materialism. Meaning architects don't necessarily even get paid more than developers. I mean, the very senior ones do, but by and large, management can't tell good design from bad design, so they're never going to compensate somebody for good design, right? So it doesn't matter. Developers make the transition when they hear the calling. That's kind of like the best way of describing it, where you sense that there has to be a better way of doing things, and why are these things not working? And you basically can't stand the banal mediocrity, the low quality, the missed opportunities, the blown commitments, the frustration, the anxiety, all the maladies of software development, right? And you say, okay, and basically that's basically starts somebody on a journey. And I don't know if you mentioned it in my bio, but I conduct masterclasses all over the world for architects. Nobody ever forces the people to come to my masterclasses. Okay, the boss never said to them, "You go to the architect's masterclass or else." Okay, they go there because they sense something is wrong and they need to actually do it. And this is all the long answer for your question. Do you need to be a senior developer? I find that senior developers sometimes have a harder time in my seminars because there's so much more to unlearn.
Sure.
If you don't know anything, then anything goes, right? But it's worse than just you can't teach all dogs new tricks. If you spend a long time getting really, really good at doing bad things, okay, trying to undo that requires even more work, right? And so it's a double-edged sword, right? On one hand, you need a certain level of frustration to become an architect. On the other hand, you don't want it to get too stuck into it because then you won't be able to, right?
Yeah. Okay. So the architect is looking at a project, a solution. They're coming up with the hows and the whys and the whens. And I guess it's a lot of diagram work. It's a lot of paperwork explaining it. Would these architects actually code?
I disagree with these statements, but go on.
Okay. So what I was going to say is, do they cut code? But as you say there, you disagree with that statement entirely. So they don't draw pictures and do paperwork as well then?
They absolutely draw pictures, but it doesn't mean they produce a 225 laborious pages document with all the errors and such, right? Architecture,
Sure.
software architecture, the essence of it can be captured in 1 or 2 pages. If you need 20 pages, you blew it. It's too complex, right?
Okay.
Look at all the systems around you. I can do a schematic diagram of the human body on 1 page. 2 kidneys, 2 lungs, a liver, a spleen, a heart, skeleton, done. I don't need 20 pages for that. Now, the digital design, you need volumes, right? But for the architecture, it's fine, right? Architecture, by its very nature, is all encompassing. It's regardless of the specific. For example, a mouse and an elephant have the same architecture. The digital design is totally different, but the architecture is the same, right?
Yeah.
And so you don't need more than a page or two to capture the architecture itself, and probably another maybe a dozen pages to capture the interactions. So one of the things that architect needs to do is not just design the static layout of the system, but design also how the system is called to behave at runtime. Okay, and that may take some additional pages, but the architecture itself is fairly concise, terse. Less is more when it comes to architecture. Really, less is more.
Sure.
And
So
go ahead.
yeah, they design the how it hangs together from a very high viewpoint from that 10,000 foot view. But from what you're saying there, they also decide on how it's implemented as well.
So now it depends on what kind of a team you have to work with, and let's define a senior versus a junior developer. Okay, and by senior, I don't necessarily mean somebody has more years of experience. That typically doesn't correlate too much in the industry, unfortunately. My definition of a senior developer is somebody that can actually do the digital design. So the architect may actually say, I need 2 kidneys, I need a liver, and I need a heart. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The developer then need to decide if it's going to look like an elephant or a mouse. Okay, that's a senior developer can do the transition from an elephant to a mouse and back and forth, right? Basically, they do the detail design. Okay, junior developers can't do it. Junior developers can code, meaning they can do implementation, but they're not going to figure out the aspects of the design of the services. So there's a whole song and dance of how do you actually hand off the design. It's based on the composition on the team. It's based on how much time you have to do it. It's based on the process. Maybe you shouldn't waste your 2 or 3 top developers as developers. Instead, you should guide them on how to do the design, and then you hand them off the architecture as an architect. They do the digital design, and then they hand off that to developers, and that's probably a better use of the senior developers. And so there's several maneuvers and several techniques. There's almost no one size fits all here, right? Because people are people, and every team is different.
Yeah, it's that's the answer to every IT question. It depends.
It depends, yes.
So I've worked with several different architects, and being opinionated, and a bit of a loudmouth. I've often questioned them as to why they've made decisions, and some of them, they're quite happy to explain it. When I've made other suggestions, some architects have been dead set against it, and when they've been dead set against it, it seems to fall into maybe a myth, or but it's something that's definitely talked about, and it's architects in their ivory towers. They seem to see themselves above other developers. Is there any truth to that?
Yes. So let's actually kind of go to the human factors here, okay? There's several causes why you get these ivory towers. I call them astronaut architects, okay?
Sure.
Astronaut architects are floating in space, holding some design. This is a good design, la la la, but, could this team even deliver on it? I don't care, it's a good design, la la la, right? That's the song of the astronaut architect. Now, astronaut architects come in many flavors. Some they sit at some enterprise organization and they produce empty documents, hundreds of pages of word salad that are totally unactionable, and they're just going from one meeting to the next and so on and so forth. Right? You know what I'm talking about. Now, this kind of top level enterprise architect is fairly pervasive, even though I think beyond a certain size, every organization must have an enterprise architect. Just like I think that every team should have an architect. Okay, but the reason most organizations must have an enterprise architect is because that's the only way to take advantage of the economy of scale of the company. Because otherwise, everybody invents the wheel in every team all the time, and there's nobody that can have a cohesive vision. We will move to the cloud, and we are going to do it this way, right? And so that's a job of enterprise architecture, and most enterprise architects are just too high above and too remote and too distant and so on. The other reason you see ivory architects or astronaut architects is people that actually don't know what they're doing. And when you don't know what you're doing, you're going to camouflage it with lots of hand waving and complex words and diagrams and such that have no substance. No architect ever wakes up in the morning and say, I have no idea what I'm doing. It's like, I don't know. I was never trained as an architect. I sort of haphazardly got the job. What now? That's not how people actually operate. And so that creates a lot of scorn on the side of developers. And, in the pre-interview, I told you, I was only half joking that I almost agree that most developers don't need most architects because most architects are not that useful, right? If somebody wasn't trained on doing the job of the architect and doesn't know with a capital K underscore bold how to do a design that's going to be good for decades, then I question their ability to be an architect.
Sure. So we talked there about them being in their ivory towers and outside of the reality of the process and the project. Shouldn't the architecture be a part of the actual build process, a mindset for everybody that's actually working on the code?
The architect is instrumental in every turn of developing the software. I say that 2% of the job is doing the architecture and 98% of the job is keeping it there. Okay? Even if you come up with the world best architecture and you encapsulate all the volatilities and all the things that I show how to do, if people don't value what you're calling for, they're going to butcher it. So first of all, you have to educate them on why these things are the way they are, right? No amount of design reviews and code reviews will fix it. If developers are hell-bent on butchering your design, they're going to butcher it. And it's going to be your fault because they should have valued what you were calling for. They may not have been able to come up with a design in the first place, but to be able to value what you're calling for and follow simple instructions, that's on you. So first of all, you need to value it. Second, you have to communicate what your design means, right? And that means not 100 set of diagrams, but simple, terse diagrams that are easy to understand, simple instructions. And then we discussed that there's additional design work that has to take place. And it's actually a bad day when the architects to do it, right? Because in theory, if you have 20 services and each one requires 10 days of work, you just added a year of work to the project, right? And so that's totally impractical. So it's going to be the best for you, the best for the project, the best for everybody if developers are going to be capable of delivering on those design activities. But that means the architects to be in the trenches, holding their hands, blazing the trail, making sure they know what to do, constantly reviewing, critiquing, constant culture of improvement. commitment for quality, being involved in the scope of every service by reviewing what the service needs to do as far as requirements, by reviewing the design, reviewing the test planning, the test activities, reviewing the code, doing it 20 times over across all the services, reviewing all the integration activity, staying on top of things. This is ongoing. That's 90% of the job. The architecture is literally so minuscule, it's not even worth talking about. It also doesn't take long to do, right? You can produce, even for a large project, the architecture in under a week. But then you're going to get 2 or 3 years of 80 hours a week development. So the amount of time spent on architecture was insignificant. But this is also, to use a house analogy, very common. If you're going to build your dream house out in the country, you may spend a week or two with an architect, but then you got 3 years of working with construction company, right? And so it's almost the same ratios over there. And so absolutely the architects to be part of the process. And I would argue that the architect should take a long, hard look at the process, if there is even a process, because most organization process is just code like hell, right? But if you got something better than code like hell, then you need to take a look at it and say, how's it working for us? In the past, how have we met our commitments? What was our quality like? Okay, if you don't like the answer for these questions, you don't suck your thumb in a corner. You turn around and you change the process. And no, I'm dead serious. And you start with that. It's more important than the architecture. It's way more important than the architecture. Start by designing the process. Make sure that what you have there, because look, nobody else is going to do it. Developers are not going to design the process. Managers are not going to do it. Marketing is not going to do it. Who's going to do it? You. And so you start by looking at the process.
Yeah, and I think what I found funny there was the sitting in the corner and sucking your thumb. I've definitely worked with architects. I've definitely worked with developers and project managers as well that have gone and done that when things haven't gone their way. So yeah,
I say to my customers, you are the people you've been waiting for.
Yeah. You just don't know it yet.
No, but when I say it, they know it.
Yeah. So we opened the episode and we've titled this episode "Do Developers Need Architects?" And I think there's a two-barreled answer to that from the conversation we've had, and that is they don't need bad architects, but
Absolutely.
what they need is good architects.
Applause from Sweden on my side. You said it very well.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess that a good architect is somebody that is down in the trenches. They're not sat in an ivory tower. They are giving you that bit of paper that says this is what the system looks like, but they're also there looking, checking that what is being built meets the requirements. It meets that initial design all the way through the project.
Absolutely.
And all the way up to delivery.
Right, and I would say they're competent and qualified. That's also important, right? You don't wing it through, right? You lead decisive blows and you get it right. You don't have too much time to do it, but you got to get it right. And so, just as important is the architect needs to up their game, learn what it takes to do good architecture. Hopefully, my next book would address that need in the industry. And I titled my next book "Writing Software," but spelled RIGHT.
Yeah,
meaning the homophonic of writing. And but I definitely intend to address this need for knowledge in my next book, because literally being a good architect today is like something that you can only learn if you have a mentor, if you have somebody that you can see doing it. It's one of those things like the tribal knowledge, right? They don't teach how to be a good architect in computer science schools.
Sure. So if somebody wants to become an architect and a good architect at that, is there proper certifications? And proper is probably not the correct word. It's not the proper word. But is there something they can go out there to become a certified architect?
No, unfortunately not. One of my hopes is that as the software industry matures, that only licensed, certified, whatever the word is going to be, software engineers will be able to practice. And in any other engineering domain, you can't design a bridge, and if you're not a certified bridge designer, because if the bridge collapses, you need to go to jail. And you laugh, but I'm serious, right?
Yeah.
And in software, your software can take down businesses and destroy people's life, but you're not culpable. You're not accountable. If people are not
Yeah.
accountable, then bad things always happen. So one of the things that eventually will happen in the software industry, just like it happened with any other knowledge-intensive field, doesn't matter if it's doctors or lawyers or engineers. Hundreds of years ago, you can call yourself a physician and sell snake oil, right? And that would be just fine. You could put a leech on a patient. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. But in the modern age, we don't take it anymore. We say no. Only somebody that has been tested, certified, proved to be qualified can practice. And it doesn't matter if you're a doctor, a lawyer, a pilot, a welder. It doesn't matter, right? Because we know with anything which is knowledge intensive, we have to set the bar correctly, which is why
Yeah.
lawyers have to pass the bar and so on. At some point, this will
Yeah.
happen. This will happen with software. The reason it hasn't happened with software is because we haven't had a major disaster yet, and so
Yeah. Yeah. It's an argument I've seen come up online time and time again, is that we call ourselves architects, we call ourselves software engineers, but in the strictest sense, you're not an engineer because there isn't that real certification like there is for other architects and engineers in other industries.
I
So
agree.
yeah, it's a maturity thing.
It's completely a maturity thing, and the sad thing is we actually have a core body of knowledge which is equivalent to what they teach in engineering school, except there is no university on the planet that teaches these things.
Yeah. So anyone out there that is listening, there's a gap in the market there. Go out and do something.
I've been teaching masterclasses for architects for almost 20 years now, and
Yeah.
I've taught it to several thousand by now, but it's a drop in the bucket compared
Yeah.
to the volume that we should have actually done this.
True. So for everybody out there listening, if they wanted to go and learn more about becoming an architect, and maybe they want to become one, maybe they just want to understand it a little bit more, could you advise them where to go, what to read?
I would definitely suggest reading my next book, Writing Software. Even if you don't intend on being an architect, it will give you a different vocabulary to think about software design problems, and it would set a different tone in your entire conduct with the business, with your colleagues. In my book, I talk a lot about the soft skills also required to win, to get people to agree with what you're saying, to get them to refuse to do the bad things.
Yeah.
And I talk about also the project, not just because just as design a system, you have to design a project to build it, because otherwise it's also not going to happen. And
True.
so that would be a very good start. I think that, but a book is just a book. People also have to practice. You can take a look at legacy system that you have, and say what did we did wrong. The design was. If I could, what would should be look like? And it's no cost. There's nobody's going to complain. Just visit your the legacy systems and see what was wrong, what has changed, why the response to change was bad, and so on, right? And learn from your own mistake. Start looking if your city has a user group for software development. Hopefully, there's even a software design, a software engineering user group. Now, I live in Silicon Valley. There's a dozen software engineering group. Maybe your city has one. If it doesn't have one, set up one. Start looking into conferences and events that talk about software architecture, not software development, software architecture.
Sure.
Start. I mean, it's like acquiring any field of knowledge, right? There's this journey you have to go through, right? And and you will very quickly find out if you like it, if you want to proceed, what is involved. It's a fantastic journey. Most people that start on the journey never look back.
Yeah, and I have done architecture in the past. I was an architect in one of my previous roles, but I jumped back to being a developer, and then I've then become a dirty contractor, as I keep getting referred to.
A mercenary.
Yeah, so I'm in there upsetting people and in new businesses now and enjoying it thoroughly. But being involved in that design stage, it is something that I get to do quite a bit. One of my current clients, I lead the innovations team. So as the lead developer there is no architect for that team. I I put my architect hat on there and innovate some new systems.
I can tell you, I think that what's the last few years is literally the golden age of architects. Everything is coming together to show the industry how crucial architects are. Simply because the cost of mistakes is immense. People have to live with the system for much longer now. Simply because the system gets more complex, it gets more expensive. That gives companies every incentive of amortizing the cost of development over the longest period of time, right? Because the systems are so expensive, which now in design means it's even more critical. The rate of change at the same time is incredible. The rate of change also just in technology, but also in businesses, in how technology affects the business. Look at how AI has affected most businesses. Look at what blockchain is going to do over the next few years. Look at what the cloud did 10 years ago. This is like the golden age for architects.
Yeah. So you heard it here first. Now is the time to get in there and become an architect.
Excellent.
Excellent. So the question originally was, do developers need architects? And we've nailed it down to no, they do not need bad architects, but yes, they need good architects. So that also sort of wraps things up, and that's all the time that we've got today. And thank you to everyone out there listening. I'm James Sluddart, and you've been listening to Juval Löwy talking about, do developers need architects? If you have any questions about this or any other episode, then drop us an email, a tweet, or leave a comment on the website where you can find all the resource links, show notes for each episode. And if you enjoy this episode, please leave a review on your favourite podcast platform, iTunes, Stitcher, whatever it is, and help The Cynical Developer to reach more developers around the globe.